Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Chimamanda, thank you very much.
God bless every country with people who sabi, that is the intelligent people, the middle class, the lower class, people who not sabi. And there's a reason why God put all these people. Chief Chimamanda Ngozi, hi, God bless you wherever you are. Okay, look at the woman day to day life on Arise TV. Now what? See, it good make you, good make you they talk through for your life. Look at all the professors, people who sabi book where God give us. They are not. They're supposed to be a blessing to us, but they are a curse. Now them follow the. Now them say they be professor, make us go to school, but they follow to make our country bad, make us have bad life. Now them they read election. Now professors they read election. Man, watch what this woman talk today. See how
Much indeed for joining us, and I apologize for the stress you had to go through getting to the studio. I understand it's pouring buckets in Lagos, and there's the snarling up of traffic. So thank you very much for joining us.
No, I should apologize. I should have left, knowing Lagos, of course, I should have left on time. So I should apologize.
Well, the most important thing is that you're here. So let's get straight into it, because you called the 2023 presidential election a slap to the face of the Nigerian people and insults to the collective intelligence of Nigerians. Tell us why you see it that way.
Well, I see that when I wrote that letter, because I think it's important to preserve the truth. Right? I think that when something like this happens in a country, it's really important to tell the story of what happened. One of my favorite poems has this line, it's by Robert Lowell, and it says, "And yet, why not say what happened?" So I wanted to say what happened. And what happened is that this was an election that was really unforgivably flawed. And there's evidence for that. And I felt it was important to say that. But also I wanted to call out the US for what I consider a kind of two-facedness when it comes to Africa. So, the US has a long history of complicity in, sort of non-democratic elections on this continent. So recently in Congo, 2 or 3 years ago, they endorsed an election that was an absolute sham. But then the same US will turn around and criticize Congo for not being democratic. And so my point was to say, be what you say you are. Right? You cannot criticize African countries for being undemocratic, while at the same time endorsing something that is quite self-evidently undemocratic.
Well, that's a good point. But just delving deeper into your letter, you were quite categorical in saying that the electoral process was imperiled not by technical shortcomings, but by deliberate manipulation. Is there enough evidence in your assessment to support that claim?
Yes, and I think maybe the most glaring is that we Nigerians all saw these mutilated election sheets, right? We all saw them. We saw polling unit agents talking about how what they had from the polling unit was not what was then announced formally, officially, or uploaded formally, officially. And I think for me, that's a really striking reason and an example of how this election was not about technical glitches. And can we also realize that Nigeria is full of very bright young people in tech? There's no reason for that excuse of technical glitch. And the other question then is, if it was a technical glitch, why was it possible for most people to upload the results of the other federal elections, but not the presidential? And I think most of all is that there's just been this resounding, unfortunate silence from INEC and from the chair of INEC. I think Nigerians deserve the respect of an institution that's supposed to shepherd their democracy. So nobody's come out to explain to Nigerians how that happened. There's a statement about technical glitches. It's unconvincing. And knowing how much hope and trust that Nigerians invested in this election, knowing that Nigeria is a low-trust society, means, I think, that if people really are sincere and there's really nothing to hide, then you make an extra effort to go out and explain to Nigerians what happened.
Yes, that certainly makes a lot of sense to a lot of people. But in reacting to your letter and some of the things that you said in it, the APC have suggested that you were not in Nigeria during the election and you did not vote and therefore should not make categorical statements about an election you did not witness. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I don't think it's very useful criticism. I should say, first of all, that I've never been fazed by criticism. I mean, I wrote this, of course, knowing fully well that there would be criticism from certain quarters. And I've seen a few things people have sent to me, and it's kind of been amusing to read the juvenile fulminations of non-juvenile people. But that said, I actually did try very hard. And I should say, I have two homes. I have a home here in Lagos. I have a home in the US. I'm very often here. I tried very hard to get my PVC. And the reason I tried very hard is because I had been assured that technology would save us. Right? That it had walked in Oshun, walked in Ekiti, and I think in Anambra, that it would save us. And so I really tried. And we should also talk about how difficult it was to collect PVCs and how that in itself is a form of voter disenfranchisement. And so I had done the first part, but then I couldn't collect my PVC. And so, yes, did not vote. But my not voting does not mean that I cannot comment on an election. I'm a Nigerian citizen. Every Nigerian citizen has a right to have an opinion about this election. And so when people say that Beavers walked, but IREV didn't walk, which is sort of a way of countering the accusation that the technology was manipulated, really the response is both have to work for the election to be credible. Right? So Beavers was about making sure that we didn't have ghost voters, that people who were actually there voted. But that it defeats the purpose if you then do not upload the results, because those results that you have sort of you've made sure that real people voted, but then those real results, we can't see them in real time. We cannot see them as Professor Yakubu Mahmood said. He said, and I'm going to quote because I've read this so many times, that the public will be able to view the polling unit results as soon as elections are finalized on election day. Right? So I think that's a really important thing to talk about and to address with the Nigerian people. The Electoral Act says that INEC, gave INEC the legal backing to have electronic transmission of results, and did say in a format that INEC would decide. Right? And we know that format because the chair of INEC told us what the format would be when he said that these results would be uploaded at the end of voting from the polling units. And that was not done. And it seems to me strange to sort of deflect from that important issue and talk about how someone, is not in Nigeria and how... those are not the points. The point is what happened? What happened?
Well, absolutely. And I suppose that is also the crux, to some extent, of the legal challenges that are ongoing at the moment in court. But in the sort of rather caustic response to that letter that you wrote to Mr. Biden, you mentioned Mahmood Yakubu there. The Tinubu team have suggested that you may face a lawsuit over an allegation contained in your letter that Mr. Tinubu may have compromised the chairman of INEC, Mahmood Yakubu, although you also point out that there is no evidence of the astronomical US dollar amount he is rumored to have received from the president-elect. Are you worried about the possibility of a lawsuit?
No, and I'm not worried at all. Again, I think that these are things that try to deflect from what is really important and what is at stake. It would be very useful if people could point out what is untrue in the letter. Right, so I think it's important, we talk about, we all know these stories of people who complained about, how we voted at the polling unit is not what we're seeing reflected in the results. All of those stories, which, yes, they're anecdotes, But I think they give us useful insight into what happened in that election. In a way, it becomes a kind of, all of those anecdotes together become a kind of tidal wave of truth-telling. And I think that the rumors surrounding this election are part of the story of this election. If you leave a gap in information, people will try to fill that gap. It's how human minds work. And again, like I said, our country is such a low-trust society. And we're so desperate to believe in something. And then we believe in this election, it doesn't work out well. And nobody gives us a convincing reason. So of course people are going to rumor about people being compromised. Also, our political landscape is steeped in people being compromised. So I'm not worried about that. I think that any fair-minded person in this country who's honest will acknowledge that these rumors are circulating. I said very clearly there is no evidence for them, but I do think it's important to say in the story of this election that many people are starting to think that what explains what happened is this compromising.
Yes, and of course, you supported Peter Obi, the candidate of the Labour Party in that election. He, according to the official results, came third, and we've seen a number of spokesmen from the APC suggesting that you were supporting your sort of tribesmen, to use a rather sort of old term. But in that context, what do you make of the polarization and the ethnic divisions that appear to be deepening as a result of this election? Do you see ethnicity as being politicized? If so, how dangerous is that in your assessment?
Well, to address the first part, and you're right, tribesman is such an outdated and strange expression, which I think also says something about whoever is using it, right? I think that kind of accusation is a practice of what psychologists call projecting. So you're doing something, but then you accuse someone else of doing it, even though they're not. I did not support Peter Obi because he's Igbo, as I am. I'm a person who does not take positions lightly. And so while I very much admire Peter Obi, respect him, there are many other Igbo men who I admire and respect, and I would never vote for them for president because I just don't think they would make good presidents. And so my support for Peter Obi is actually rooted in real things. It's rooted in my faith in his ability. And actually, I got to know him, I got to know Peter Obi years ago when he came to pay homage to my parents because he had heard that my father was the first professor of statistics in Nigeria and that my mother had retired as the first female registrar of the University of Nigeria. And so this man just sort of arrived and said he wanted to pay homage. And I was very impressed by that because it showed me how much he values education. And then he becomes governor of Anambra State, and he takes Anambra State to #1 in education. And I remember being very impressed by the story of how he had given his personal phone number to all of the senior prefects in secondary schools in Anambra, which I think also showed me that he's interested in what ordinary people think. Right? You don't just want to hear from the administrators, you want to hear from the students about what's really happening. And his focus on insecurity, he really tackled kidnapping in Anambra. And I also remember that he really sort of clashed with the Anambra elite when he was tackling insecurity and kidnapping. And that showed me that he's quite decisive. He even has a bit of a stubborn streak. He's very focused on things. And so that's really why I support him. So this idea of sort of ethnicity is just really, again, I think it's a way of deflecting. Let's focus on what really matters. It's unfortunate that, and can I just say that I think that it's only one part of the political spectrum that is politicizing ethnicity. And I think it's very unfortunate. I don't think most people in Nigeria really care about ethnicity as much as they care about having a country that works. we want good leadership. We want the hospitals and the schools and the roads to be good. And and that affects everyone. Igbo, Yoruba, Ijo, it affects everyone.
Yes, again, people would agree with that assessment from you. But I wonder if I might change direction slightly and get your thoughts on the Nobel laureate Wole Soyinka's assertion on Arise News about reactions to the election results by the Labour Party's vice presidential candidate, Yusuf Dati Baba Ahmed. Comments which Professor Soyinka described as fascistic. I mean, do you see that as part of the demonization of Mr. Obi and his running mate, as some have suggested, or do you agree that Dati Baba Ahmed went, or rather overstepped the bounds, and Professor Soyinka was in that regard justified to call him to order? I mean, I know you hold, or at least you have held, Mr. Soyinka in high esteem.
I still do. I have a lot of love for Professor Soyinka. I admire him. I respect him as a thinker, as a writer. I think everyone should read The Man Died. And Ake, his memoir, is beautiful. Right? But at the same time, I disagree very strongly with him about this particular issue. And actually, because I respect Professor Soyinka so much, I went back and watched the interview. I had watched it when it aired initially, but I went back and watched it because I thought, am I missing something? And I think fascist is a really strong word. Fascist actually often makes me think of Mussolini's Italy. But I think we use it now, sort of to address this kind of authoritarianism that's often populist and right-wing, like in Hungary, and even the former American president. And when you look at those situations, you can see why they have been termed fascist. And I did not see any reason that Mr. Dati Baba Ahmed's interview would have been termed fascist. I think he was making a very strongly felt point about the elections. What he was saying, which again I thought seemed fairly reasonable, is that if our democracy is rooted in our constitution, and you then swear in a person who's been elected unconstitutionally, then you're in fact ending democracy. I think it's quite a reasonable position. Of course, we can argue about what that bit in the Constitution means, right? And I'm actually grateful for this whole election period because it's made me read things I probably never would have, such as the Nigerian Constitution, and also made me have quite a few suggestions for editing. But anyway, I think now we're talking about what does "and" mean, right? So Mr. Dati Baba Ahmed is saying that it's 2/3 and the FCT, and that's separate, and it's a reasonable argument. And is a conjunction. We use it in that context often to mean plural, right? So we say Aisha and Yemi are coming, and we don't say Aisha and Yemi is coming. That's because they're two separate things, two separate entities. And of course, the court will interpret, but I don't think it's unreasonable for educated Nigerians who can read and who know what the word "and" means to make their own interpretations and to argue it. And of course, the fact that the Labour Party is in court means that they do not believe that this election is constitutional. And so I just didn't, I didn't quite see why it would be termed fascist. I mean, I think a charitable way of reading Professor Soyinka's comment is that Professor Soyinka himself, I think it's fair to say that he is not given to restraint in language in general. And so maybe that's where that word fascist came from. However, I have suggestions for what we could use fascist for. We could use fascist for INEC. Because as it is right now, many Nigerians feel deeply cheated by INEC, deeply disenfranchised by INEC. And there's an authoritarianism, which obviously is the basis of fascism, at the center of manipulating an election. Because what you're doing is you're gagging people, you're forcibly taking away their voice. That is fascist. Fascist is all of the violence that happened during the elections. Fascist is the way that some people remain silent about that violence. Fascist is, fascist is a government that hasn't come out to address the very tangible and palpable discontent in this country. I think that, and when I say that we can use fascist for INEC, what I mean is the fact that, so many of us, including myself, are convinced that this was not in any way technological glitch. I think that Professor Yakubu had an opportunity for heroism, and I think he wasted it spectacularly. Because he could very easily have become the hero of not just Nigerians, but Africa, because so many Africans are watching. They were so inspired by what happened before this election and the obedient movement. And so, I also think that the president, President Buhari, missed an opportunity for heroism, maybe his last chance at heroism, because Nigerians do not feel that I think Nigerians felt before the elections that he meant well and meant to support credible elections. I don't think many Nigerians think that now. Right. And I wish that he had taken a page from, the former president.
Very briefly, because we're out of time.
He was a really good man, a moral man.
Right. Just literally 10 seconds. The opposition parties are challenging the election in court. Do you think they'll get a fair hearing?
I hope they will. I think there's reason to doubt that because the Supreme Court has had rulings that just did not make a lot of sense to most people. And so there's reason to worry, but I'm hopeful. I'm generally hopeful. So I'm optimistic that they will do the right thing and that people will get justice.
I'm really sorry I had to interrupt you to end the program, but unfortunately we're out of time. I could talk to you forever, but thank you very much indeed for taking the time to come and share these your thoughts about the elections with us. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is a critically acclaimed award-winning author, and she was talking to me from our studios in Lagos. That's it for this edition of Arise.